Welcome to EB-5 Investment Voice, where attorney insights intersects with immigration investments. If you are a foreign investor, domestic fund manager, or enterprising entrepreneur and want to get the most out of the EB-5 program, you have come to the right place. I'm Mark Deal, and I'll be your co-host on this journey. I'm joined by your host, Mona Shah, and other attorneys at Mona Shah & Associates, as well as immigration leaders from around the world. So let's get into EB-5 Investment Voice. Hey there, EB-5 Investment Voice listener. You may recall in our last episode, we talked about a new bill, a possible path for reauthorization of the EB-5 program, and we were hoping that this bill would be introduced. Now here we are today, and happy to say that it has indeed. And there's so much to unpack here that we're focusing on our in-house experts to help enlighten us. They are, of course, Mona Shah, Rebecca Singh, and Christina Dilbone. So Mona, I'll turn it over to you. I know we've talked about many bills that have been introduced over the last 5 years, more than the last 5 years, in fact. How is this bill any different?
Hi, Mark. Yes, we do think this bill is different. So this bill, the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act of 2021, which we mentioned on the last show, has been sponsored by Senators Chuck Grassley and Patrick Leahy. So there you have a bipartisan bill immediately. It was introduced on March 17th, 2021. And I know we've been discussing bills over the last, 7 years, since 2015, at least 7+ bills. And we have spent no end of hours going through the actual body of the bill and making changes and suggestions. And we send them back through IRUSA mostly. And we sent it back to Congress, and then it fizzled out. But what is different here is that the two areas which have caused the most dissension have been the TEA definition and the investment amount. And subsequent to the 2019 regulations, those two are decided. So now, we really just needed a bill for reauthorization purposes. But saying that, Rebecca, there's been quite a considerable amount of reaction from the industry.
Yes, there has been, Mona. As you said, not just having to reread the bills over and over again, which we've heard a lot about, but everyone in the EB-5 industry is having mixed reviews on the bill. We've had really...
Well, I wouldn't say everyone. I think, to be honest here, the vast majority do support this legislation. I think there's just a handful of splinter groups.
Yes. And which I think you and we agreed that, and Christina, we have discussed this so many times, and we think the bill is actually beneficial.
Oh, yeah. I can understand why the splinter groups are opposing. We're never going to get what everybody wants. We're never going to find a bill that pleases everybody. That's for sure.
Nothing is perfect, right?
No.
And the main concerns that they were arguing on was the TEA and the investment amount. And if those two are already taken care of by regulation, what else are we fighting for?
Yeah, we do have a little update on a possible case, but we'll talk about at the end of the show, relating to the TEA. But before we get to that, I think the more I read this bill, the more I like it. I know there are winners and losers, but it's got my vote.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And Mark, as you said earlier today, what is the difference? This bill has a lot more compliance and a lot more on the integrity of the EB-5 program.
Right. The bill does not focus on the areas which we had all of the dissension previously. There are clear, I'm saying winners and losers, but I don't really see the losers per se. But we can start with the losers and then we can talk about the winners, right? So in the losers, you could say that it is maybe regional centers themselves are the losers. And Christina, you've done some homework here.
That's right. So our firm does a lot of regional center compliance and securities compliance. So we've been involved in this for some years now.
Christina, I know we've seen a lot of sloppy work out there, and it's really frustrating, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, we've seen a lot of regional centers who don't keep up with their records, aren't ready for the annual compliance reviews, and it's been very frustrating. So I think this bill really takes aim at some of those regional centers that have been slacking off and not keeping records the way they should.
So what exactly are we seeing, Christina, in the bill? Without going into technical details, we want to keep this so that the average person can understand.
Right. So this bill addresses the fact that Regional centers are required to keep additional record keeping and accounting of their books. They're also required to make additional disclosures about conflicts of interest and even legal actions and bankruptcy actions that are pending against them. And the bill also imposes new sanctions against regional centers if they don't comply with these requirements.
That's a good point. Right now, I think this is something that I really see as a positive here. Throughout the bill, my reading is that if you do something wrong, they're going to close you down. You're going to be sanctioned, your regional center be closed down. Right now, what happens, if you're closed down, it's the investor who suffers. But in this bill, I think we're seeing some differences.
That's right. And those sanctions can be anything now from fines to temporary suspensions, whereas in the past, USCIS could only give you an opportunity to remedy the problem.
And if they closed you down, what would happen to the investor, Rebecca?
Yeah, unfortunately, for that case, when the regional center is terminated, investors kind of lose out in a bit as there's no way for them to continue with the green card process.
Right. But this bill allows an investor to jump to a different regional center, which I really applaud. Yeah, I know.
Yes, it's really good.
Yeah, there are a couple of other things for the investor which we really like. Number one, the fact that an investor finally is able to file concurrently.
Yes. Can we take a moment to applaud on that one?
Boy, have we seen pain through the years.
We sure have. So a lot of our investors have, had trouble with maintaining their non-immigrant visa status. So this, in a way, if you have concurrent filing, allows you to be able to stay within the U.S. as your EB-5 petition is pending, even though your non-immigrant status is expiring. So it saves a lot of time.
And you can stay with a work permit. That's the important thing.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So what's great about it is once you file that within 90 days, you can get that work permit and your travel document. So you'll be able to work legally in the U.S. and be able to travel outside of the U.S. as well.
All right. And then we have a second round of applause for one more clause. There's a good faith protection for innocent investors, including age out protection for children.
This, by far, I think this deserves a first applause. But no, you really do. You feel for families who have filed, and unfortunately, they end up losing out on the green card at the end of the day. And if they have to refile, unfortunately, if your child has aged out at that point, because it's taken X amount of years to get your green card in the first place, your child is no longer able to apply with you. But luckily now, you're able to continue as a child, even though you're over the age of 21, if you refile a second petition once it was based off of fraud.
Right. Mark, we were seeing some crazy things with the Chinese cases once they had really gone into retrogression. Children as young as 4 years old having to be, the investor. Mm-hmm. So the beneficiary, just because of aging out. So great. USCIS has finally heard us. Do you know, yes. I wonder if they heard us. We must have mentioned this on our, when I use our wand, maybe somebody was listening.
Well, I have looked at our stats pretty frequently, and I see people on the Hill downloading and listening to our show. So thank you. We're glad that you're here. And it sounds like the changes that they've implemented with the program address two things that are outside the investor's control that adversely affected the investor. One is if the if the regional center, if they did something or didn't do something that they should have done, it hurt the investor. Now they can switch. And previously with children, with USCIS taking so long and children aging out, now that's no longer the case. So I'm glad that they're fixing it and not penalizing the investor for investing in America, because that's not the point of the program. And maybe they finally got it.
Yeah,
exactly.
And Rebecca, they can also use the recovered funds for another investment under this bill also.
Yes, they can, which is great. So as long as they can retain that priority date as well, which is also important. So if anyone is in backlog, let's say, for China, for instance, instead of losing that date that you initially filed, you can retain that date. And so that way you're not pushed out another 2 or 3 years behind the line.
Right. And one other point, which we'll see if it actually does work, is that the bill states you will have to have your case adjudicated within, I believe, 20 months.
Yeah, so 240 days.
240 days,
or
yes.
less, yes, depending on what projects they are. For example, exemplars, I think it was 190 days or 120 days. But everything is under 240 days, which is a lot better than what we're seeing today.
Well, let's see if USCIS does stick to that, because I wouldn't hold my breath. But anyway.
It's in there.
Christina, what is the update with regards to audits and site visits in this bill? Because that's there now. What's different about it?
Sure. So under the current regulations, USCIS can conduct site visits on EB-5 projects. But in this bill, site visits are actually mandatory for the removal of conditions on an investor.
In addition, Christina, they also have that regional centers must get an audit at least once every 5 years.
That's right. So regional centers really have to begin keeping up with their compliance. USCIS is going to be peeking in the door.
Again, that focus on integrity.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. But Rebecca, I do see, again, when we talk about losers, that regional centers lose out again. There's a huge increase in fees, right?
Oh, yes. So 20,000, be ready to pay up. It's 10,000 for those who have 20 investors or less the previous year, but it's still a lot more than what we're seeing today. Also, what's funny is because it's going into this EB-5 integrity fund, they're also increasing the filing fees. So they're adding an extra $1,000 to all the filing fees as well.
Well, $1,000 isn't so bad, really.
Yes, but if you imagine how much
it adds up,
that will be going in to that EB-5 Integrity Fund, which will be used to do these site visits and compliance for the EB-5 program.
Yeah, well, the other problem, though, I do see, it's again for the regional center. Christina, I notice that a fund administrator is requested. What's this all about? And what is a fund administrator?
Sure. So fund administrators are actually very common in the finance world, in capital markets. So hedge funds, private equity funds, all of these funds have fund administrators. And it's really the legislators just catching EB-5 up to the times.
Well, Mona, it's nothing new, though, right? We've seen fund administration happening within the EB-5 program before. It was just never mandatory. That's
right. So now USCIS is going to require EB-5 projects to retain a fund administrator, an independent third-party administrator, so not somebody that works for the project. Yeah. And it can be a broker-dealer, an attorney, or a firm, or a CPA. But they must be licensed, they have to be active and in good standing with their registering agent.
Yeah, this is all great news for the investor because it does give confidence to the program. But here's where I see the issue. The big regional centers are going to be fine. They probably already have their fund administrators and all of their stuff and all the ducks laid out. It's the smaller regional centers because we know there was 800 plus regional centers set up. They're not all big regional centers. Many of them are project related small regional centers. These are the ones I feel are either going to close or going to be in trouble.
I agree in the way that I don't think they would have, a lot of them don't have the capacity to comply and do what's necessary to keep track of this. But at the same time, I mean, look, you're looking at a third party. You can find anyone who is reliable and they also have to be a signatory to the account. And if you're serious about it, then it would be a way to go. But again, it's the cost. Even if you don't have a fund administrator, the waiver to that would be to have an audit. Yeah. And you'd have to get an audit on the NCE and the JCE. So we know that from experience. We've seen audits take 6 months and the cost for that is tremendous. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I see that. I don't know, guys, but I feel like what Congress is doing is just trying to make the amount of regional centers out there manageable, limit what is there.
Yeah. And I think, look, ultimately, at the end of the day, they are looking out for the investors. We need to look out for the investors and make sure that the funds are being used correctly. It's ultimately their life. They're looking for their green cards as well, and making sure their investment goes through the correct way.
And Christina, you made a great point about not being able to so easily go out and buy a yacht on EB-5 investors' money.
Yeah, of course. I completely agree with Rebecca. They're looking out for fraud. They're looking out for the investors and making sure that nobody's running away with the money that is not theirs.
And I want to also point out, Mona, for a lot of regional centers out there, this is something, again, that they have been doing and that they have maintaining records. I think it may be just a bit more paperwork, but I think it's something that if you're in the business, you know how to get it done.
So why are we getting some opposition in the market? And I think one of the reasons is that it appears on the face of it that construction projects might be penalized.
Okay, so this is where I think I'm confused. And I think, a lot of the economists were a bit worried out there because they were worried about job creation in itself. But I found that the bill actually helped construction projects, especially those that are less than 2 years, because you're allowed now to have a percentage of the direct jobs counted, whereas today, currently, you can't count any of those jobs.
Wow, so it actually helps the developers.
Yes. Again, it's another point for the bill. I feel that things, like we said, there's not everything's going to be perfect, but I think it's still manageable.
Yeah, I think the fear for some of the stakeholders is that we don't want to agree to everything just in case they throw something at us we can't change later. But I feel like, again, you can't have everything either.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that's what they're afraid of. But at the same time, look, it opens more doors for us, Mona. We have more room. Like, we got the integrity measures in. I think that was Congress's point. And now we need to fight for more visas.
Right. Oh, there's a source of funds issue in this bill also. I think there are a few changes here.
Yeah, so now it's not just on the regional centers for integrity measures. We want to make sure that investors now are not just getting a loan or a gift just to circumvent any of the limitations that are imposed. So they have to have a gift and a loan in a good faith manner.
But isn't that the case now? Aren't they made in goodwill?
So I think what Congress, their intent here is to make sure that any of the gifts, for instance, gifts that are given, the intention of a gift is not to get repaid. So they want to make sure that's not happening and to make sure the loans are given in a way that it's a proper loan with your proper interest rate and is being paid back in the right means.
Well, winners and losers. Another loser, I would say here, are third parties and brokers.
Ooh, yes.
Christina, do you agree?
Yes, absolutely. USCIS is going to require them to register and be in compliance with USCIS policies.
And that means anybody who is getting a commission, everybody will know about it. There will be that transparency.
Yes, that will be made public.
Again, falls in line with integrity and transparency. I think they're towing the line across the bill, even though it's making it a little harder for people that maybe they weren't as upfront.
So here's what happens, Mark. Many times third-party promoters are not official brokers or they may just be friends and relatives, and they don't want the investor to know that they have made some money out of an introduction. So that's going to go. So the point, it may not just be a relative also. What I do like, though, is the fact that you might get a person who introduces an investor to a project simply because they're getting a high commission. I mean, that's happened amongst attorneys, CPA people, professional people too. And it is not right because perhaps that attorney doesn't even understand anything about the project, but just because they're getting a high commission. We've seen this, Rebecca.
Yes, and I couldn't agree more. We have seen where you're just showing a project because you're getting the funds for it and you haven't conducted your own due diligence.
Yeah, I agree. And another point which they're bringing up now is something that they've been discussing from the outset, and that's bad actors. So currently, Christina, when we have a securities offering, what's the rule with bad actors?
So the Jobs Act added some language to SEC regulations that disqualifies people called bad actors from being a part of an offering. They can't issue, they can't be one of the developers or even managers. And all of this misconduct that qualifies someone as a bad actor is essentially relating to false SEC filings, the purchase and sale of securities, or other financial actors. But in this bill, they refer to bona fide persons.
So in order to be a member of an NCE, a JCE, or a regional center, you cannot have somebody who has had a criminal conviction.
That's right, which is much more broad than the SEC bad actors qualifications.
Right. And another thing that we have in this bill, again, they've talked about it, but it hasn't been implemented, are foreign actors. I'm not necessarily bad actors, but anyone who is not a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, they cannot now be part of a JCE or an NCE or a regional center.
No, you cannot have any ownership or any involvement in any of those companies.
And there's been lots of them, actually. There's a considerable amount, I would say, more from perhaps the Indian side as well as the Chinese side, people who own their own regional centers who are not US citizens. They don't live here. They own the NCE. And what tends to have happened is that one way or the other, the money has gone out of the US, so it's been taken out of the US.
Exactly. And then where do you find a jurisdiction to go after them? And not even just ownership. We've seen it where we've just seen managers getting involved that are foreign entities or foreign individuals.
That's actually a really good point. So if a manager does something wrong and you can't sue them if they're overseas, that's, I think, what you mean by the jurisdiction, right?
Yeah, yes. And what if, they're not complying with the SEC? This has become a huge issue, is how you're spending the funds, right? We know the 500 has to go into the project, but then you have the issues with the administrative fees. And if that's not being taken into consideration, then again, that can leave the investors in a bad spot.
Guys, are all of these new rules, are all of them retroactive or not?
No. So this is not going to be retroactive. It will take place on the effective date.
So that means anybody who's currently, say somebody who's a foreign actor who's in a project, for example, they're okay.
Yes, at this time.
Well, ladies, this bill that's been introduced sounds great. What are the chances of it being passed?
I think they're pretty strong because most of the industry do realize that we do have to have reauthorization. And we forgot to even mention that. I should say, but wait, there's more. The bill gives EB-5 a 5-year reauthorization. Not a permanent reauthorization, but we're getting there.
5-year stability.
Yeah, it's better than what we had before. So
Yeah. One last point. It's not about the bill, but I would like to bring it up because some of our listeners may have heard some gossip about a court case out in the Northern District of California, Bering Regional Center versus Wolf, whereby there have been talk, and I can say that we've heard this on Chinese blogs, that the 500 amount is coming back. I would say, hold on, because the case is still in process. And I personally don't think that they are going to succeed. But, what do you think, Rebecca?
I agree with you. I don't think they will. And I don't want them to. I will be honest, because I think that USCIS will be in a mess with all the back and forth with the amount changing. And unfortunately, projects also that, you're going to have to change documents again. It's going to be a lot more cost. Let's just finish the backlog that we have right now and get through and get our investors who are already in there their green cards.
I agree. So this case, Mark, is all about the fact that the officer who sanctioned the regulations was not properly authorized by the Senate at the time. However, the Biden administration has just come into the case and they have weighed in on behalf of the government. And they are saying that the court should ignore that point, basically. But of course, these blogs really do at times miscommunicate these issues.
Well, thankfully, this is a bipartisan bill, so it has supports on both sides of the aisle. I think many people remember that EB-5 was what pulled us out of the 2008 recession, or at least it was a big part of helping out. And we certainly need that as part of our COVID relief and our COVID recovery today as things start to get back to normal. How will this bill, the extension, and changes and interpretations of the EB-5 law change in the next few months or even the next 5 years? Well, stay subscribed and tuned in for more updates. And of course, we'll have more industry experts on to help us understand what it all means and what we need to do to make the most of it. Mona, Rebecca, Christina, as always, it has been a pleasure. And thank you for making time for all of us today here on EB-5 Investment Voice.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for being with us today on EB-5 Investment Voice. The topics presented in this podcast is informational in nature and is not to be taken as specific legal advice. If you have questions on the topics presented in this episode or other investment immigration needs, please contact Mona Shah & Associates. Mona and her attorney staff can be reached at mshawlaw.com. That's MSHAH law.com. Make sure you don't miss our next episode focusing on a different aspect of the EB-5 program by subscribing to the podcast. While you're at it, leave us a rating on iTunes. If you really found this episode valuable, share it with someone else that could benefit from this information. Until then, I'll see you on the next episode of EB-5 Investment Voice.